Hello, and welcome to Higher Results, where business, workforce, and talent intersect. I'm Melody Reagan, CEO of Eye to Eye Workforce, and your host. And today, our topic is translating the multilingual workforce. And with us, our expert, we have Melissa Burkhart. She is the president and actually founder and owner of Futuro Solido, and they specifically deal with the multilingual workforce. So welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Melody. Thanks for having me on today.
So do me a favor, and let's start off and share with us about your business and what you do and how you help businesses.
Well, long story. We started out about 17 years ago by now. And our original concept was simply to have a translation business where we would take a message, be that a document, written document, benefits booklet, employee handbook, safety instructions, and translate mostly from English to Spanish, though we also provide other languages. And we very quickly realized that we can get paid all day for putting words into another language, and our clients really aren't getting the results that they're looking for. Anytime an employer or a benefits broker or a business of any sort wants to translate a message, it's because they're looking for certain responses. They're looking for certain results. If you're translating your benefits, you want people to participate in those benefits, choose to enroll in those benefits, and then use them appropriately. If you're translating safety instructions, you want people to actually change their behavior and comply with those instructions. So simply translating the message is an extremely important first step, but it's only a first step. And so it didn't take us long to realize that we can do that, but we need to add additional value and support if we're really going to help our clients get those results, get the responses that they're looking for.
Fantastic. So what we are doing today is we're going to talk about the multilingual workforce. And I want to give you a couple of statistics. You guys expect that from me, right? So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, today our employed workforce, this is what's fascinating to me, today it's 78% white, 17% Hispanic or Latino, 12% Black or African American, and 6% Asian. Now, here's what's interesting. Those statistics actually match almost, except by 1 point, our general population. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is you get a crossover between white, what is known as white or Caucasian, with Hispanic or Latino. It's only 61% that fall into the category of purely white. Now, the thing is, we're focused on a diverse workforce. And one of the foundations for having that diverse workforce is the ability to communicate. And that comes down to language. In looking at language, I found this really fascinating. About 40.5 million of our 327 million population today, we continue to grow, are actually Spanish speakers. They know Spanish. All the other languages, it's really maybe 1.1, 1.2, 1.4 million. The dominant second language of the United States, which we all know, is Spanish, right? And so consequently, the other thing is, according to the Brookings Institute, by 2045, we're going to be dominant, what is known as minority white. The flavor and the beautiful diversity of America is continuing to evolve, and so is our language. And language is the foundational component for communicating. So what we want to do is we want to talk about, for business today, is there value in a business becoming a multilingual business, and should we be supporting it?
Excellent question. I think the most important point to consider with that is their value in becoming a multilingual business is that we already are. And many, many businesses have no choice. It's not that they set out to have a strategy that we will hire, diverse workforce or speakers of other languages. It's that nobody else is showing up. There are not people who are willing to take these jobs and do these jobs who have English as their first language. And so part of what we talk about when we address employers of Spanish speakers is exactly what we mean by Spanish speakers. So I was interested in those statistics you were sharing, and you touched on questions of race and ethnicity. In terms of the question of language, when we talk about Spanish speakers and the work that we do and a linguistically diverse workforce, we really are talking about people who came to this country as adults and for whom Spanish is really their first language. And for those folks, they brought with them not only their language, but their culture and their priorities and their experiences, because they spent their formative years in their country of origin. It's a very, very different experience if you come to a different country to live, no matter what country that is or where you're coming from. If you're a small child or if you're born in that country to parents who are immigrants, because your formative years are then spent here in the United States. So when we're talking about Spanish speakers, we really mean people that spent their formative years primarily in Latin America and then came to this country in order to work. And very often, those folks are the only people who are interested in working in certain occupations in certain industries.
Right.
And we have clients who are really struggling to fill positions. Particularly, one example I can think of is in hospitality. We work with, we're here in Colorado, so we work with a lot of resorts, and resorts are having a terrible time finding employees who are interested in doing housekeeping or maintenance types of jobs. We had a client that is struggling so much that on a busy weekend in a resort town here in Colorado, the wife of the general manager and his daughters were making beds and cleaning toilets. I kid you not. Because literally...
It was good for them.
Yeah.
Good experience. They get to know it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Develop that work ethic, but not ideal from a business standpoint. They had guests waiting to check in that were there at 4:00, which was check-in time. Guests who were paying premium dollar, because resorts in Colorado aren't cheap, and that were not pleased that their rooms were not ready for check-in. So there are many employers that we work with that are really struggling with this. And so it's not a question of, is it advantageous to develop a multilingual workforce? It's that they are absolutely forced to. It's part of the cost of doing business. It's part of survival as a business to bring in employees whose first language is not English.
By the way, I love the distinction because there was another one. And what is this? According to the 2016 American Community Survey, I thought this was really fascinating. What they have found is that most individuals who speak a foreign language also speak English incredibly well. So they do well to well. But what you did, and they said only 8% of our U.S. population is considered limited English. But what you brought up that is really important is it somebody that was born here? And there are many people who are born here that are multilingual, English and Spanish. Or is it somebody who is actually coming from another country? And our largest immigration path is actually from Latin countries. And that is where our workforce, and there are specific industries that have this as an issue in understanding and being able to communicate with their workforce. So consequently, what I'm hearing you say is it affects every component, how you go about hiring, how you go about onboarding, how you go about managing them. From an end-to-end perspective, you have to be able to communicate with your workforce, right?
Very good question. And I would say that bridging the language barrier can be at times extremely important and at times not so difficult. We've been doing it. We've been doing it for years. This is nothing new. We've had Spanish speakers in our workforce for decades and decades, and for certain objectives, it's not that difficult to give people instructions. It's not that difficult to find somebody who can kind of get by in both languages and answer simple questions and show them, here are your tools and here's what you're supposed to be doing, et cetera, et cetera. And so sometimes from an operations standpoint, depending on the industry and depending on the job description, bridging a language barrier to get someone functional is not that difficult. And of course, technology gets more and more useful and helpful. For simple instructions, we've worked with companies where a foreman or a supervisor will pull out their phone and will type in simple instructions. We need you to start at this time, or this is the way you use this machine, or this is the power on, power off, et cetera, et cetera. It's really when an employer wants to engage employees, wants them to understand the value of certain processes, wants them to understand what makes them more valuable as employees, that both the language and the cultural barrier get a little bit trickier to address. And so safety is one of my favorite examples. You can translate safety material, and the word safety and risk have very different connotations and resonate very differently for typical Spanish speakers working in this country than they do for those of us born and raised here. And so that's where translation, where communication involves more than translation. And for Spanish-speaking typical employees, we really need to take a few steps back and explain to them why compliance with safety is important, not just so they don't sprain their ankle or bump their head or break their arm or fall off a roof, but is important to the well-being of the company as a whole.
By the way, that totally makes sense. All right, so let's talk about what is important and how would an employer go about understanding and being able to better, more effectively deal with their bilingual workforce. What do you recommend?
Good question. Usually we start a conversation with an employer or they'll start the conversation with us because there is an issue. There is a struggle of some sort. And they're looking for certain results that they're not always seeing. And so we really want to understand first, what is the employer trying to achieve? Do they just want to check a box and say, yes, we put our benefits plan into Spanish and here's our benefits booklet in Spanish? Or do they really want to retain employees because those employees understand the value of their benefits, are getting value from their benefits, are using their benefits effectively, and are telling the new hires, hey, benefits are called benefits for a reason. The word benefit in Spanish has the beneficio, does mean a good thing. And so depending on what the employer wants to accomplish, we can either put that booklet into Spanish or whatever language we're dealing with, or we can really talk to them about strategies and tools that we've created and developed that will help employees understand the value and the importance of a benefits package and how to use that to their best advantage. So a lot of options there, I guess.
Yeah, well, do me a favor.
Sure.
When you're talking about that, what are some ways or techniques? So one is sometimes if you do have that bilingual, it's also obviously translating. And I have to tell you, one of the things that Melissa and I talk about, you may have somebody on your team that speaks Spanish and English that might translate it. I would actually encourage you, just like if you have something and you have an editor, you need to have somebody else review it because they may not know some of the cultural implications. They may not understand what the impacts could be. It's not just about doing it in-house. So it's something you got to pay attention to.
That's one of my favorite topics, actually, Melody. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. So being bilingual does not mean that you have perfect writing skills or professional writing skills in either language that you speak. Being bilingual and assuming that someone is bilingual and can therefore translate is like assuming that someone who plays baseball can ski Black Diamond Hills. They're really totally different skill sets. They both have to do with language, just as skiing and baseball are both physical activities that involve athletic ability. But there really is not a whole heck of a lot of guarantee that because you can do one, that you can do the other. One reason or one question that I encourage employers and HR folks or anyone in the communication for whom it is a goal to communicate effectively with Spanish speakers is to consider what is the background of the person who wrote your employee handbook. What is the background of the person who put together your benefits booklet? It wasn't someone with an 8th grade education in English. It wasn't someone without tremendous writing skills and language education and background. And bilingual employees are incredibly valuable and incredibly important. And very often, the ones that we talk to hate being asked to translate. It's not part of their job description. They have different types of expertise, whether those are administrative or whether those are operational, et cetera, et cetera. And as I said, about 17 years of business, we have very, very rarely come across a team member, a bilingual employee that is able to translate effectively. Actually, it's far, far better to just have professional translators take that off their plate and do it right, because correcting a poor translation is more expensive and takes longer than simply doing it right the first time. The good news on that is that any professional translation agency, ours or anybody else's, that's using the best practices and best software that's available to the industry now will be able very efficiently to do your updates and changes and modifications to your document the following year that will be much less expensive than the original shot. So if you have, if we, for example, have translated your handbook a couple years ago and you have some updates, a couple years ago maybe it was a big line item, the updates really won't be, because the systems used in translation today will recognize previously translated text and will populate your next document with what has been previously translated. So we're not reinventing the wheel every time.
By the
so
way,
it gets easier and cheaper.
I love that you're using tools. Well, let's talk, because I know as far as this, let's talk about what are common mistakes. What are common mistakes that if you're dealing with a bilingual workforce that employers make? Unintended, what happened?
Sure, and interestingly enough, or when we talk to employers about this and have these conversations, people sometimes feel, I didn't know that, I should have known. No, there's no way you could have known. Nobody told you. How are you going to know? Right. So the first mistake is to assume that simply translating a message is going to achieve your objectives. That a message that was designed for people born and raised in this country is not necessarily going to resonate with people born and raised in a different country. Anyone who has spent considerable time in a country outside of the United States might notice this, that not only are people around you speaking a different language, they have kind of weird ways of doing things. They have different priorities and different norms. When I speak on this topic, I usually tell a story of how I worked in Japan when I was right out of college and managed to make a tremendous fool of myself. That'll be another story, another clip at another time. But it really, I had a translator trying to help me, and I just was completely clueless. So the first mistake is assuming that if a message gets conveyed in an employee's first language, that they're all of a sudden going to buy into it and comply and respond in the way that we'd like them to. So very often there's a lot more that needs to be done. Benefits is a great example of this kind of thing. Employers spend a tremendous amount of money, time, migraines, gray hairs, on putting together benefits packages that are going to be valued and effective tools to retain and engage their employees. And then very often when it comes to presenting those benefits to Spanish speakers, all of that money, time, and effort just goes down the drain. And so the assumption that a bilingual employee can convey something complicated, which English speakers, pretty well-informed, well-educated English speakers struggle with understanding benefits, assuming that a bilingual employee can onboard and educate Spanish speakers about benefits is a huge mistake, very often, or very, very risky way to go, whether it's translating a written document that we already talked about, or whether it's standing up in front of a group of people and translating the description of the plan, or presenting the description of the plan. We recently worked with a client who expected a bilingual supervisor to be able to do that. And we had a rep listening in on the phone who wasn't able to interrupt, but the bilingual supervisor basically told the guys, this plan covers everything. That got said. I did not explain out-of-pocket costs, did not tell them what a deductible was, what coinsurance was, what an out-of-pocket max was. And then in the end, his grand finale was, okay, so who wants to participate? You don't have to. It's not required. So not the greatest way to generate enthusiasm. And it's not his fault. That's not his job description. So those are a couple of mistakes that we see often and that can really backfire and put people off an initiative that was meant to draw them in and engage them.
So by the way, you have a base knowledge. So just as far as a couple of things, because this is a topic we could have a long conversation about, but unfortunately our time is always limited. A couple of things that I just want to say for everybody. Obviously, you need to look at your workforce. You know what you have. Do you have workers that have migrated to the United States from other countries? Did they grow up someplace else? Is it in that bilingual? What are the situations that you need to effectively communicate with them? And they're no different than any other workers. Like what you said on benefits, we communicate about benefits to everybody, and some people take advantage of it, some don't, some understand it. Having somebody translate doesn't mean that they have the base knowledge within the category that you're even having them translate. So there is something to be said for having experts as we are in this evolutionary journey. Now, one of the things that I want to speak to is there are some industries that more than others, and just so you guys know, you know who you are, but hospitality, education, law enforcement, customer service, social services, finance, and communications are some of the top industries that are addressing this. And one of the things that I want to say as far as a wrapping, what we have found is that actually bilingual workers are pretty doggone impressive because they have both languages and the way that their mind works and in that diversity and creating that higher level performance. So embracing the whole of your workforce within the capabilities that you have as a company is a very positive thing for you to do. And what I'm going to ask you, and bringing us home on this one, is what would be one bit of advice that you would give an employer? What's the one thing that if we want them to have a takeaway today, what would that be?
Support your bilingual supervisors. Very often, the gentleman that I described, and I hope that it didn't come off as critical of him, who was not prepared to present benefits. The people who are in that role of being, they're expected to communicate effectively with English-speaking higher-ups and with Spanish-speaking boots on the ground, are under tremendous pressure, particularly if their first language is Spanish.
That's right.
Very often, we expect those folks not only to be, installing drywall or cleaning hotel rooms or picking, avocados. We expect them to be diplomats. We expect them to be able to go between two groups of people from different countries, cultures, languages, and backgrounds and bring them on board. And they're not prepared to do that. That's a very difficult job. And they get promoted because they're excellent employees usually. They're loyal, they have seniority, and they can communicate in both languages. But they don't have leadership and communication skills, usually when they're moved into a position that requires them to be leaders and to communicate. That's
an excellent point.
We love that. I could talk all day, but I won't. One element that we are offering at Futuro Solido is supervisory skills training and support, and identifying where the breakdowns are in relying on that level of employee, and not saying, hey, you need to hire different people, but showing employers that you need to, if you want these folks to be doing what you need them to do, you need to support them in a way that is perhaps a little bit different than what you would expect.
By the way, I think that's an excellent example. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
By the way, we really appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you guys, if you have any questions, do find us online and share some questions. We'll get them answered for you. Thank you for joining us today on Higher Results. We air every Tuesday at 3 p.m. We're on Facebook /Higher Results. And if you miss an episode, don't worry about it. You can find us online at eye2eyeworkforce.com /higher-results. So until next week, we'll see you on the internet.
Thanks.